Hi everyone, and welcome to the Math 8 PLC. Scott and Stephen have given me permission to summarize our work this year as a Math 8 PLC, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. We are just a group of best friends trying to teach some kids and close some gaps. So this year in Math 8, we had a unique opportunity for a consult period during the fourth period, all 3 lunches. I was able to meet with students and do targeted intervention in math. So at the beginning of the year, because I was running the console, I used that time to pull in several students and do targeted interviews and intervention with our focus students in 8th grade math. We consulted research as a PLC and framed intervention according to why students are struggling. The inquiry cycle that we are looking at is a really big data set from September to March. The way that we organize this is student growth was measured by averaging all standardized summative assessments to a GPA or a grade point average, and then averaging total GPA for units 1 through 4 when we stopped school in March. So every 8th grade math student has an SBA score from 7th grade math. So we took that 7th grade math score and we subtracted it from the unit average GPA, showing the amount of growth for each student in addition to 1 year. That's a lot of crazy math, so let me explain it to you. Let's say a student scores a 2 on the 7th grade math SBA, and then the student has an average unit GPA of 2.6. That means if you take all the tests that they took, all the summative tests, and you average their grade, accounting for ES being a 4, MS being a 3, and so on and so forth, they would get 2.6. And their SBA score was a 2 on the 7th grade test. That means they've grown 0.6 years over a year's growth, or 1.6 years of growth. Because if a student goes from a 2 to a 2, that would be 1 year's growth. So this student in the example is growing a little bit more than 1 year. Well, actually a lot more, 0.6. All right, so what students did we focus on? This group of 8th grade students actually started out in 6th grade as our CSIP cohort, and so we took the CSIP cohort that had been set in the 6th and 7th grade and continued on. So all 3 of us, Graham, Payne, and Hallowell, chose focus students through the following lenses: students of color, not meeting standard in grade level math, and have responded positively to Tier 1 classroom instructional intervention during their time at Robert Eagle staff, meaning they showed more than a year's growth in 6th or 7th grade math, meaning they responded to classroom teaching. And so we used them to see if it would respond to our classroom teaching. I interviewed several students as a note here, and there's only about 15 to 20 kids in this data set because not every kid was in the same class at the same time and we couldn't really find data on all of them, or maybe they moved schools. So these are the kids that I had a data set on for the whole year. Okay, so this is how it worked. I interviewed several students in the beginning of the year in September and October with a targeted list of questions to find out their background in math, and then I placed them into one of 3 categories that closely matched their math story and why they struggled. And then as a PLC, we used targeted interventions specific to each group to move student learning and mastery. So I wrote all the interview questions on this slide, and I'm just going to give you a chance to read through some of them. All right, and here are some responses I have from students. Okay, so taking all this data of the interviews in math and talking with our math department, I decided to use the research of John Tapper in the book Solving for Why to understand and try and categorize 3 reasons why the students are struggling in math. So in his book, John Tapper says, math struggles are strongly associated with 3 factors. It would be inaccurate to suggest that all of these are causes of math struggles. Rather, research about these factors suggests a strong correlation with the mathematical difficulties. These factors can be thought of as three intersecting categories. So, when looking at the students' interview answers and figuring out why they struggled, I looked at environmental factors, which often might mean language, culture, race, parenting, education, socioeconomic status, poverty, and then a gap in schooling, which was a large reason for a lot of our students being put into this category. Another group would be cognitive understanding. This might be students that have a learning disability, physical challenges, memory difficulties, and what I mean by that is that they're not able to connect a math concept with a previous math concept because they aren't making sense or meaning of the two concepts to connect them together, and they're not using them in real life enough to understand why they would be important or relatable to another concept. And then quality of instruction. This could be several things. In the book, it's categorized as possibly a mismatch between the learner and instruction, possibly an ineffective teacher, possibly content not making meaning in the student's life. A big factor here also is an emotional state of a student might not be present to be able to learn math. Maybe ACEs are going on. Also, a negative math identity and then a negative association to math is blocking the student from being able to be present and then understand the content. So we put all of these kids into these three categories and then decided as a PLC what interventions we wanted to use for each of these targeted groups. So these interventions are a collection of high leverage teaching moves that are based in research, and the math department has been using since the beginning of Robert Eagle staff. And then also the Math 8 PLC has been building on these for 3 years. Some of these are also district math initiatives, like routines for reasoning and elbow partnerships and mathematical mindset. So for the environmental factors, a lot of the students in this group had missed some of school due to a move, or maybe they had some missed schooling in the middle of the school year, and so they maybe had gaps in fundamental content or vocabulary. And then if students were having difficulty due to language, it was helpful to put them next to same language peers. Graphic organizers, elbow partnerships. For our cognitive understanding group of students, the preferential seating in the front and then checking in was helpful, and then piloted IEP accommodations and modifying assessments. And then the quality of instruction students, the relationship building was the main piece that we tried as a group of all teachers in our PLC. In addition to that, intentional seating, social contracting, different mathematical ideas like stand-up math, elbow partnerships, routine for reasoning, just to try and shake things up a little bit to see if we could get them to learn in different ways. When it came to the fourth period consult class that I ran, the things I did with targeted intervention that were really effective were pre-teaching the content, and then for the students who had missed schooling, reviewing the missing content from earlier grades, a lot of fractions and decimals and negative numbers. And then I also pulled their exit tickets and did reteaching, test retakes, and study groups. For students with cognitive understanding, we referred them to MTSS and connected them to language and SPED services after doing accommodations and testing them out. We actually had those students move in the middle of the year to more self-contained, smaller classes to get the services that they needed. Quality of instruction, we connected with families, did a lot of assigning confidence by pre-teaching in the fourth period class, and then did a lot of personal goal setting and check-ins. And also, what's not on here is intentional seating of groups of students who made goals to work together. All right, so here comes the data crunching. So I took the names off of this because I wanted to really be able to focus on the data. As you can see here, I split these groups into the three environmental factors, cognitive challenges, and quality of instruction. Here, right, is the raw score, if in case anyone's curious. This is the 7th grade SBA score we started out with. And so then here are we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 these are summative assessments that happened before the school closure. So when you look at this first student, for example, 2.4 is an average of every grade they got on this test. There were 5 standards, so I averaged those grades together to get 2.4, and then so on and so forth. If you look at this column here, this is the general average of all of the units put together. So this student had a general score over the year of 2.4, which is approaching standard plus, everyone's favorite grade. So this student got a 2 on their 7th grade SPA, which means that they had growth of 0.4. So that means that if they were to just get another 2 on the SBA for 7th grade or for 8th grade, they would have a 1 year's growth. But this is showing that they have 1 year's growth, and then this 0.4. And then we were able to do a predicted SBA score. So looking at this is a lot to unpack here. These 2 students ended up moving classes in the middle of the school year, and they didn't end up getting these assessments in, which is why they're blank, but this is still their average and then their growth. And then, of course, here you can see the average of students targeted for quality of instruction intervention, and then their growth here. This cell is a average of all the cells of growth. So overall, in the 8th grade PLC, we had an average growth of our focus students of 0.73. So this would mean in addition to a year's growth, they would be getting about 3/4 of a year's growth. So the anticipated growth here would be 1 3/4 of a year. So we were able to predict their SBA scores here, and as you can see, many of them have jumped up 1, maybe 2 levels as a result of the intervention. Then this is if we would have had the SBA this year, but of course we didn't. So this is just a grade normed average approximation of what we think would have happened. So in conclusion, the student group that responded most to intervention was the environmental factors group. This could be because we correctly identified their root of struggle, or because the interventions were just really strong. Moving forward, we would formally interview kids more frequently throughout the year so we could add more data and determine what interventions specifically are having the strongest effect. Thank you so much for listening.